Here are the answers for the Chapter 13 practice test. Number 1, your answer is A. Now, for this video, if you got the answer correct, you can just fast forward to the next part. I'm going to explain each one in detail, but you don't have to sit and listen to every single word I say if you don't want to. But anyway, your answer is A. Which measure of center best describes Josh's scores? Well, I told you way back that pretty much your median is going to be right. Your median is your best measure of center, like probably 90% of the time. So that holds true here. Your median's 83. Your mean is a little bit higher because of this 98 here. Got a little outlier. All this other stuff is clustered together. There is no mode, so that is a bad answer here. And range is not a measure of center, so I didn't even bother figuring out the range. So it was really just down to median and mean. And like I said, median, you really can't be wrong with median. So you could have got away with really doing no work at all here. Question 2. Which best describes the variation in the data? So you're looking for a measure of variability. So right away, that eliminates letter A and letter D, because lower quartile and upper quartile is not a measure of variability. The only thing that you could possibly have as an answer here is B or C. So in order to get your answer, you got to go ahead and put these all in order. Then figure out your interquartile range, and you figure that out by finding the median. And then once you have the medians, you can find the Q1 and Q3. You subtract them and you get 4.5. Your range here is 11, and I said kind of the rule here is if you have a big difference between your IQR and your range, you're just going to choose your IQR. So your answer is B. Anyway, number 3, which measure of variability best describes the data set? This one, I gave you 5 possible answers, but really there's only 2 that are actually good ones to choose from. Your upper and lower quartile, you should just get rid of those. Those are not measures of variability. Your mean is a measure of center, so that doesn't make sense. So once again, measure of variability, we're just talking about range and IQR. Now you notice I didn't do any work here. I'm going to tell you why. Your answer is IQR, and I know it's IQR without doing any work because I see this 20 and I see the rest of the numbers. The rest of the numbers are clustered pretty tight together. Your lowest number is 2. Your highest number in the cluster is 8. And then you have this big 20. So I can imagine what this would look like as a box and whisker plot. You'd have a really long whisker. I don't necessarily need to do any work because I can see that there's an outlier in there. And I said outliers immediately kind of disqualify the range and make the IQR the way to go. So take those shortcuts if you see those on the real test. Question 4, your answer is letter C. Which measure of center best represents the data? Well, D is not a measure of center, so don't choose that. What do we got? Oh, I was going to say, why don't I have any work? And the reason why I don't have any work is because of this outlier right here. First of all, I don't have second of all, I guess, I don't have a mode, so I'm not going to choose mode. And this outlier I know is going to drag my mean down. It's going to make my average lower than the rest of the numbers. It's not going to be a true measure of center. So I don't even really need to do the math behind this because I can use logic here. I know median is going to be right almost every single time, 99.9% of the time. And then when you see that outlier, then you know median is your best measure of center. It's going to be right in the middle. Number 5, your answer is D. So let's I guess go through each one. So the mean is greater than the median. So we need to see if that is true. So the mean is 79, about 79. Your median is 81. So your mean is greater than the median. Well, that's not true. So A is definitely out. The interquartile range is 81. Now I found the interquartile range, but let's use logic here. Look at these numbers. There is no way that your interquartile range could be 81 based off the numbers that you see here. The range is only 28. They're kind of packed relatively close together. And we learned back when we learned range and IQR that your IQR could never be bigger than your range. So moving on, half the scores are less than 70. Well, that is definitely not true. 81 represents the halfway point. So that means half of the scores are 81 or greater, and half of the scores are 81 or less. So that does not make sense because you'll notice that here, half of the scores are less than 70. That doesn't make sense. Really, only one score is less than 70. And then the range is 28, and the range is 28. You take 94 minus 66, you get 28, and we're looking for the one that is true. So that's why that is the answer. Number 6, your answer is A. Which one is not true? We're trying to establish here. So I guess we know the answer is A. Let's move on to the other ones, why they are not the answer. So the median is greater than the mean. Well, your median here is going to be 65, and it actually is greater than the mean, 64.5. So that is true. So because that's true, B is not your answer. C, interquartile range is 8.5. That is also true. Here is my Q3 and my Q1, and I subtract them, and I get 8.5. And my range is 11. That is also true. So that really only leaves us with A by process of elimination. We could also explain why A is the answer. It says half of the students are taller than 68.5 inches. Well, they use 68.5 inches because that is actually your Q3. And that does not mean that half of your students are taller than that. What that is showing us is that really only a quarter of our students are taller than that. Only 2 of our students are taller than 68.5. Remember, half, if we're ever talking about half, that's going to be your middle. That's going to be your median. Number 7, your answer is C. There's a peak at 5 to 9. Which one doesn't describe the data? Peak at 5 to 9. That is definitely not a peak. Peak, we're looking at something that's like the PP&L building, really tall compared to everything else. So your peak is right here, 10 to 14. That's actually letter A. Gap at 20 to 24. Yep, there's nothing there. And then a cluster at 5 to 19. Definitely a cluster going on there. All those bars are touching each other. So C is the answer because it is not true. Number 8, answer is B. What is the mean absolute deviation? So to find mean absolute deviation, I would write down all of my values. Then take your mean, which they have already figured out, which is 87. Take 87 and subtract it from each one of these values. The number I have below is the difference, or the answer to the subtraction problem. So like 87 minus 86 is 1. 88 minus 87 is 1. These are all of the differences between 87 and the value directly above it. You add all those numbers together, you get 18. You divide by 6, you get 3. That is your MAD. Here's another MAD for you. Same thing. Your answer is C. It's actually the same exact number. It's 3. Take all your numbers, write them down. Then take that mean, which is 44. Subtract 44 from each one of these values and write the difference directly below the value. That's how I like to organize my work. That's the way that we learned it, I believe, before we left school. Take all of those deviations or all those differences, add them together, get 24, divide by 8, you get 3. And finally, what is the interquartile range? So your answer is A. How do we get that? We got to put all of these numbers in order. Find your median, which is 134.5. Once you have your median established, you have your Q1, which is right in between these two numbers. That's going to be 121. And you have your Q3, which is in between these two numbers. And to find that, you need to add them together and then divide by 2. So that gives you 148.5. Leave the 0.5 in there. And then to get the interquartile range, you take Q3, Q1, you subtract them, and that gives you your answer. So please go back and make any changes to any problems that you did not get correct. You can do this practice test as many times as you want. I know there's only 10 problems on it, but I feel like there's enough there between this practice test and the other stuff that we already did for you to get a good grade on your real test.